Okay, and then I just want to check whether our YouTube stream is going live. Great, I think we're live. Great. Good evening, everyone. This is Nick and David Morris, and he's from the McGregor Museum. And many of you, I don't think you need an introduction to David. Many of you have met David, have gone on tours with David or worked with him, have been colleagues with David. Yeah, it's quite a pleasure to have David giving us this talk this evening. So only our second YouTube talk of the year. We had one last month, and we've squeezed in another one in for July. And hopefully we may have some extra talks later on in the year. We haven't got any scheduled yet for the online version, but we are also working on recording our in-person talks. So Patricia Groenewald has some tech that we are going to try out. So we just want to see how that all works. But it is something we are working on for members that are abroad or around the country, or even local to Cape Town, but not able to reach the venues. So, getting out to OBS on a Tuesday evening is quite difficult depending on traffic and which way it flows. So there's lots to look forward to, and just keep an eye on the website and on your Facebook feed. Jean Gray has been sending out lots of good notices, keeping everyone up to date. And we have a new committee that are finding their feet in the Western Cape in terms of the comms and the communications out to everybody. So there's a couple of glitches and things, little gremlins to work out at the stage, but we are getting there, and hopefully we will get everything nice and smoothly to everyone very, very soon. So for David's talk this evening, it will be available after this event this evening. Last month's talk, unfortunately, we had to close the YouTube link as it was it featured a lot of unpublished material, and we are unfortunately unable to advertise that link publicly until the material is published. So it will be available at some point in the future, but we will let you know. This talk is public and will be reviewable after this evening. So David is going to talk about the Katu Pan hand axe, an earlier Stone Age large cutting tool, amongst other things. As you know, the site is about 1 million years old, and it was found during the 1980s at a very extensive archaeological project on Katu Pan 1. I hope some of you have been to the site or have been to Katu mining areas and have gone to look at this site. And a lot of us have worked there. There's several projects that have taken place at the site. As David's mentioned in his abstract, it is a very famous site, being featured on a postage stamp, and has been celebrated in poetry and prose. The site is part of a series of infilled sinkhole deposits in a shallow depression on the northwestern outskirts of Katu. The archaeological localities of importance in the vicinity are referred to as the Katu Archaeological Complex, or Katu, depending on how you want to pronounce it. For those in the know, the name Katu would conjure up the striking hand axe, but it also happens to be the name of a large town, burgeoning in size. I've just driven through there the other day. It's exploded in size, and it's in the midst of a major iron ore and manganese deposit area, and has some of the largest open pit mines in the world. Provincial spatial planning identifies Katu as a major industrial park within the Hamahara mining corridor, and it's not envisaged as a key area in terms of tourism or heritage sectors. Discussions and meetings over the last quarter of a century have failed to result in an interpretive information center or small museum for the site. David has been involved with the McGregor Museum for many years, and we were just talking before we went live about all the issues in the Northern Cape around increasing awareness around the sensitivities of these sites and promoting them and balancing development versus the permitting system, which is enshrined in the Act. The expansion of this town has now started to encroach on the sites, and one of the sites in this complex was damaged by a mall development, and increasing urban development, residential and so on, has further spread across the town. David's presentation is very much around heritage management, so he'll be looking at the significance of the sites, their present state and plight, and future prospects of what's going to happen out there, and thinking about the serious issues that spread across the sectors and the different mandates within local municipalities, provincial heritage authorities, and national heritage authorities. I think that, if you guys would like more about David, he's got a number of great books that you can look up, and his full bio and abstract is available on the website and has been sent out by Yvonne, I think, via email just the other day. So, David, I think I'm going to turn over to you, and I'm very excited to listen to your talk. And just let me know if you have any issues. I'll interrupt you if there are any streaming issues or audio issues, but hopefully we have a nice smooth evening. And again, for everyone on the chat, please send your questions as the talk goes along, and then I will pull those for the end for David, and we'll have a sort of 15-minute session at the end for the Q&A. So David, thank you very much for giving this talk. Over to you.
Great, thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. First of all, thanks very much for that intro. And also thanks to Lynn for the invitation to give the talk. And all the tech is very marvelous and very smooth so far. So thank you. So I'm going to be talking about mining and archaeological landscapes in the Northern Cape. And initially I thought we were going to have some news on Kantinkopi, and then we weren't getting it. And then we actually got it yesterday. So I'm going to be focusing initially on Kutu, and then just end off with some of the latest news on Kantinkopi. So looking at the present plight and future prospects for these significant sites at Kutu, it's actually based on a presentation I gave in Kutu recently, back in March, where I was actually able to take the famous Kutu pan hand axe that in fact no one in the room had known about it. We've tried to get it into the local newspapers. It's on Wikipedia and all sorts, but this is a big issue about the lack of appreciation of what we have on our doorsteps throughout the country, and especially in a place like Kutu. So I thought I'd start off giving a bit of a timeline for the context, the mining context. The map there shows where Kutu is. And there's this new Buchu Bay project being proposed for the west coast near Port Nolloth, and there's a sort of direct line from there to Gauteng, and Kutu is about midway, and it's being punted as this big industrial park and mining center in the Gamagara mining belt. Now, So the reason for Kutu's existence is purely and simply iron ore. In the 1940s, there was exploration and realization that there was iron ore in large quantities there. In 1953, the operations of the Sishen mine, which is one of the biggest open pit mines in the world, started. And then it all exploded in size from about the 1960s onwards, when it was realized exactly how enormous the ore bodies were, and that led to the Sishen-Soldano Railway and the possibility of export instead of just supplying domestic iron mills. And so first of all, it was the town of Sishen, which has now been demolished and disappearing into one of the new holes. And Kutu was developed as the alternative major center for that area. Now, from about the mid-70s, with the pumping out of groundwater for the town, the water level was lowered, and because of the geological context there, with underlying dolomite, sinkholes developed, and several of these subsided into what had been a bit of a swampy flay area, northwest of the town of Kutu, known as Kutu Pan. And in 1974-5, the children of the farm manager Nas Viljoen, who lived at that spot, the children noticed these hand axes sticking out of the sections of the sinkholes. And a local geologist, Mr. Martin Bissett, who was the chief geologist at Sishen, he recognized them as for what they were. And that resulted in a newspaper article in the Kimberley Diamond Fields Advertiser in August 1975. This prompted Tony Humphreys, who was then the archaeologist at the McGregor Museum, to go out and see what it was all about. And there's an image there of his field notes from that one-day visit, and that resulted in a further follow-up article in the local newspaper identifying the artifacts as Acheulean. So that was the first record of it. So one of the points I want to make is that mining and mining-related activities have not infrequently led to these important archaeological and paleontological discoveries. One thinks of Taung and many other sites around Kimberley, Windsorton, where some of the gravels with hand axes are about 15 to 20 meters below the surface. The only way that those are going to be found is through mining. And I remember in the 50s, or being told about the 50s and 60s by Gerhard Fock, who was here before Tony Humphreys as archaeologist. He was very concerned to cultivate good relations with miners who were then using fairly slow operations, and he was able to go in and find artifacts and fossils and so on. Nowadays, of course, with rapid and massive machinery, sites are just destroyed before anyone knows. And so unmanaged mining and development can result in the destruction. And so these are the issues we're looking at with the sites that I'm talking about this evening. So Peter Beaumont then took over at the museum in 1978, and Kutu was one of the first sites that he went out to, and he then embarked on a project of mapping the sinkholes and then doing excavation in some of them, and the famous Kutu Pan 1, which is in the image here, and I think that's Peter down at the bottom left. So that was one of the important sites. But he also discovered the enormous surface spread of artifacts at Kutu Townlands, which is to the east of the town. And he encouraged other researchers to come and have a look. Carl Butzer looked at the sediments, the pollen studies by Van Sinderen Bakker and later Louis Scott. And John Vogel dated the peat deposits to try to get some sort of handle on the stratigraphy. You'll see in the image there on the left, quite near the top, there's a dark layer, probably less than a meter from the surface, which represents that really peaty deposit. And so with high quantity of carbonates, it's possible to do dating. And then from about 1990, there was a bit of a hiatus in work at Kutu. And then from 2004 onwards, Michael Chazen has been directing work there with Jane Wilkins, Stephen Walker, Vaso Lukic looking at the geology, Naomi Pora doing the dating, Ben Scoville working with Jane, and others. And they've been looking at these various occurrences around Kutu and have defined what they refer to as a Kutu archaeological complex. So there's a map showing the Kutu Pan sites up to the northwest of the town, Kutu Townlands, which then was situated between the town and the main road to Kuruman. And then east of that, the sites on the farm Bestwood, and the Kutu cemetery site, which seem to be associated with a drainage line. Kutu townlands seems to be linked with an occurrence of raw material. And Kutu Pan is a place where there was water, so and animals either being predated there or having died naturally, and combination of animals and water being the magnet there. So different kinds of processes attracting human activity at these different sites from very early times, earlier Stone Age, Forest Smith, Middle Stone Age, and so on. And at Kutu Pan itself, there's a very long sequence all the way up to LSA at the top, and there's even some Trano pottery. So it's a cluster of 12 sinkhole sites at Kutu Pan, which had been infilled in Stone Age times, and then recently re-exposed with the drop of the water table, resulting in the sinkholes forming. And several are being researched, and currently there's been some very interesting work on Wilton material in one of the sites, but also earlier Middle Stone Age material in that site. And then, so this is the archaeological complex with Kutu townlands and Bestwood adding to the pan. Some of you might recognize yourselves in this image. This was a Western Cape ArcSoc excursion to Kutu. I think it was in 2017. And this is one of the sinkholes. You can see it's quite a dangerous environment in which to work. Peter was a real adventure in digging big trenches and going down into these spectacular places, and finding these amazing sequences of archaeological material. This is Kutu Pan. And then in stratum 4B, which is at the base, are hand axes. And that's an image of the Kutu Pan hand axe at the bottom.
David, sorry.
Yeah.
I think your connection just sort of dropped for literally about 20 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, so could you maybe just repeat the you sort of, the last I heard was you were chatting about Peter Beaumont's trenches and those sequences. So it was kind of halfway through that slide with some of the ArcSoc members in it, and then
Okay.
yeah, sorry, not a lot, but it's just that little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So we're back online. Okay. Yes. So this is one of the sinkholes at Kutu Pan, and this is an image of the section at Kutu Pan 1, and you can see those different stratigraphic layers with the peat level, and the lighter material reflecting drier periods. And alongside are some of the datings. The important ones, I think, would be around about 300,000 for Middle Stone Age, going back to around 500,000 for the 4A Forest Smith material. And below that, 4B is the Acheulean, and there's an image, in fact, of the Kutu Pan hand axe that I'll be speaking a bit more about. Estimates for that have varied. I think it's now thought to be about 1 million years old. And there's an image of Peter Beaumont brandishing the Kutu Pan hand axe. It must have been quite a moment finding it, because it is such a beautiful object. And this was from stratum 4B, found in 1980, and it's now well known as the Katupan hand axe. But it's just one piece of a very large assemblage of ESA material, including, I forget how many hand axes, a great number of hand axes, but also huge quantity of debitage and so on. There it is on the left, compared to two of the smaller hand axes that come from the same site. And I've just summarized there some of the most significant features of the Katupan one site, and also it applies to some of the others. It's unusual in that it has fauna occurring with the artifact, so fossil bone is preserved in a near primary context. The site has been referred to by Richard Klein in his argument for early hominin scavenging behavior. So, in other words, the likelihood that there were animals either predated or dying there naturally, and then the artifacts occurring alongside, being a reflection of humans then coming in, or hominins coming in and scavenging the remains for marrow and so on. Pigment has occurred in some of the sites around about 500,000 years ago. It's obviously been transported in. It doesn't occur there naturally, so that's an important innovation perhaps at the site. And there are other sites in the country with similarly old pigment sourcing. There's also a paper by Jane Wilkins and colleagues looking at intentional blade production, and a further article on suggesting the hafting of stone spearheads. And so this is an indication of the beginnings of hunting in that 500,000-year-old period. And then lastly, I've mentioned the Katupan hand axe has been used for popularizing understandings of this kind of deep time, earlier Stone Age, million-year-old human technology way back. And the hand axe is featured in exhibitions. It's been in South African postage stamps, or a postage stamp, and it's in prose and poetry and whatnot. I'll come back to that. Just briefly, a slide on the associated fossil teeth. A species of Elephas reki. Elephants evolved quite rapidly in the Pleistocene, and so they're very useful for biostratigraphic evidence of age. Although the actual age of Elephas reki itself has been revised, but it gives a ballpark figure. And there's an image, bottom of Katupan 1, with Michael Chazen and his research team. This is the paper in Science that Jane Wilkins headed up on the evidence of early hafted hunting technology. This is in the 500,000-year-old levels, stratum 4A. And essentially looking at edge damage on the archaeological examples, doing experimental archaeology, replicating those and trying to replicate the edge damage with various kinds of activities, and then an evaluation of the results and conclusions as published in Science, where they propose that these were used for hafting and for spearing, in other words, hunting. Getting back to the Katupan hand axe, which has really become synonymous with the archaeology there, although, as I say, the archaeology is very rich in other areas, in other spheres as well. Peter Beaumont described it as being technically superb, and whenever we show this to colleagues, they sometimes look at us slightly askance because it looks as if we've varnished the artifact. But in fact, it has this lustrous glaze, which results from fluctuating water levels and geochemical conditions, resulting in the deposition of silica on it. So that gives it its sheen, its polished look. And so if ever there was a hand axe destined for display, this is it. And it's featured, it's captured the imagination of all sorts of people in different walks of life and so on. So here's a sonnet, one of a set of sonnets on the Kathu Pan hand axe by Michael Cope. It's a little anthology called Sonnets from the Northern Cape, GARP. And it's called Duncan Said, and that refers to now his name escapes me right at this moment. But anyway, I'll leave you to read it, or perhaps I should go through it. Duncan said, if we could choose one thing to send into the universe to show who we are, we wouldn't have to bring stuff like computers into it. No, that hand axe says it all. To me, it's the defining human artifact. The thing he pictured for me was more grand than when I saw it merely this. It was inert, itself, discreet, exact, too broad for the comfort of my hand. The random cleave of the flake had met the mind of the blow so cleverly as to stir the stone into a froth of waves, yet true the line of the edge. It caught me, and I was thrown. And there are a few further stanzas to that. So that's the poetry. And as I say here, it's become iconic in many ways. It's been to international exhibitions in Europe and North America. It was actually due to go to Crete around about this time, but with auditing processes at the museum, it wasn't allowed to go. It's been illustrated in books, in postage stamp, as I said, poetry and prose, part of a large assemblage used in ongoing academic research. And I've always thought that in the local setting of Kathu today, where probably very little in the shopping malls and supermarkets is made in Kathu, not even bread. I think it mostly comes in from Johannesburg. This singular piece notably and indubitably fits that description. It was made in Kathu. These are just some of the illustrations, the stamp, the exhibition catalogues, some of the books it's appeared in, and there's Peter holding it and holding forth on the earlier Stone Age. So in discussion at a recent meeting on mining and impacts in Kathu, we made the point that this was a local origin and production, a reflection alongside many thousands of other stone artifacts from the several sites in the area of stages and indeed turning points in early human technological innovation and development. Yet few people in Kathu today, let alone in South Africa, have ever heard of it. So this has been a useful tag to raise heritage awareness in the Kathu area and Northern Cape more widely. Now, striving to forge ahead economically, the future is anchored in part in mining. As mentioned earlier, the Gamagara mining corridor includes Kathu, all these big iron ore mines there. So it's identified in terms of the provincial plan as a mining area. And Kathu itself has been identified as a Kathu industrial park. And so the potential for projects to destroy unmanaged heritage is enormous. And it needs responsibility to be taken up by government, national, provincial, and local, as well as the heritage sector trying to establish good relations and balance between these various sectors, including tourism. Unmanaged mining can result in terrific damage. This was a rock art site not far from Kimberley that one day we went out there and it was just gone, alluvial diamond mining. As I mentioned earlier, we've tried to get some information out through the local press, but also using Wikipedia and so on. And yet one still finds when you speak to people in Kathu, they've never heard of this. So this is explaining the archaeological complex, and in the same article we summarize the major sites, Kathu Pan and townlands and so on. And so then just to focus on the wider complex of sites, there's the map again. This is the townland site, and as I mentioned, it's very different from the Kathu Pan sites in that they're sinkhole deposits, and this seems to be focused on the raw material source, the banded ironstone, that is very rich in that area. And the Google Earth image there shows the approximate outline of the occurrence. Yeah, I'll come back to that. Bestwood is in the sand quarrying context to the east of Kathu, where artifacts are found in certain horizons in these sands within a drainage depression area. And we've had discussions in meetings I remember since about 1998, having meetings with local government, with mining and all sorts, and trying to propose tourism information or a small kind of static museum that doesn't involve too much cost and manpower and so on, to promote awareness for visitors in the area, and also, importantly, the protective measures to avoid negative impacts on the sites. So neither funding nor active steps acknowledging the sites and their potential had been forthcoming. But it's actually possible that this month and the next we might be seeing some change in that respect. So things are never exactly static, and we always hope for the best. Inexorable urban and industrial expansion, in this case more than mining as such, I think with these particular sites, is the major threat. We've got this encroachment on the sites, and Kathu's archaeological sites do have World Heritage potential. There's been some talk of linking them with Vonnevar Cave and possibly sites like the Eye and the big sinkhole at Bushmansgat as being a possible serial nomination. But such a nomination would be extremely compromised by any damage or incompatible usage alongside. So this is a Google Earth image from 2011, and I've indicated where those sites are: Kathu Pad 1, Kathu Townlands, and the Bestwood sites, and you can see they're all well clear of the town of Kathu in the middle. That's 2011. 2023, you can see there's massive urban expansion right to the very edge of the Kathu Pan sites, and expansion on the east side of Kathu has enveloped the Townland site. So far, Bestwood is clear of those, but Bestwood continues to be sourced as a quarry. And Michael Chazen was telling me the other day that there are new exposures there as a result of the sourcing of sand. And so one can very clearly see how this encroachment is posing a major threat to these sites. This is the Townland site again, and you can see in the bottom corner there's a sort of triangular expansion or development of housing there, housing units, getting very close to the site, and there's a road that runs up diagonally from that up to the left. Take note of that, because in this next slide you can see huge development of of a mall, which was cynically named the Heritage Mall, built in 2013, and it cuts a chunk out of that site. And these are some of the images we went into to have a look at what was coming out, and it's literally pouring with artifacts. So it's destroying an enormous wealth of earlier Stone Age heritage to make way for that mall. So the present plight and future prospects. Mining requires serious the impacts of mining and development require serious consideration and cooperation of different sectors at national, provincial, and local level. Local is very important for people to be aware of what these sites represent, where they are, and when something is happening, to be able to contact someone in Kimberley at the heritage or museum or whatever, and to national through that route, or directly to national, about the impacts of these kinds of developments. And it's to be noted that the present provincial spatial planning identifies Kathu as a major industrial park within the Khamachara mining corridor. And so in terms of that kind of planning, there's no envisaged emphasis on tourism or heritage sectors. And you can see in the map there, the pink is actually identified as heritage and tourism, and that goes across along the Molopo towards the Transfrontier Park, Kgalagadi. But as soon as you get down into the Kathu area, that red blob, that's just been written off as not of heritage or tourism interest in terms of provincial planning. And then the yellow line is solar energy, and this map is actually being revised now with all the Bucherberg, whatever it's called, on the west coast, with the development of alternative energy there as well. So there's a lot of emphasis on industry and mining in these areas. Now, it's important to consider heritage tourism as a resource beyond mining, because these mines are not going to last forever. It's notable that museums internationally have been spending enormous sums of money to courier the Kathu Pan hand axe to and from exhibitions. There was one exhibition at the British Museum where a member of staff of the museum flew first class with the artifact, and it's drawing a lot of people to these special exhibits in Europe and America and elsewhere. And it can be an enduring pull for this region and for its significant sites long after the mines have been exhausted and closed. It's also arguably a human need, heritage. And Kathu is a place preserving past technological innovation and production, which was a big message we were trying to convey to the people there at the meeting in March. But the prevailing mindset locally is of mineral extraction and export without beneficiation, because the iron ore just gets shipped down along the railway tracks and off to China and imported back as more tracks and trucks to cart it all away again. The hand axe from Kathu is something of a defining human artifact, one could say, as Mike Cope had it in his poem, is also, as I said, made in Kathu, where today very little is not imported. Enfolded in it are lessons that may benefit the region and its people's future. Now, I would have ended the talk more or less there if we hadn't had some breaking news yesterday about Kanti-Kopi. So I thought I'd just end with a few slides about what's been happening there. The issues of mining and archaeological landscapes have played out in recent years in the very different context of alluvial diamond mining near Berkeley West, which is just to the west of Kimberley. The local dynamics are very distinct from those at Kathu. It's much smaller scale mining, much less formal, and it involved mining of a declared heritage site. So it was quite a serious thing that happened there. Just going back to the 1990s, there was threat of mining at that point, which actually led to the first systematic archaeological work there by Peter Beaumont. Now, the site had been known for a long time. The Abbe Breuil was there in 1929, and J.D. Clark and all sorts of other luminaries in archaeology visiting the country. If they got to Kimberley, they were invariably trooped out to see Kanti-Kopi. But strangely enough, no one had ever done any serious systematic work there. And so this spurred Peter to to do the first excavation there. And simultaneously, there was a court settlement whereby mining was disallowed in the declared site, but allowed to take place around it with a 10-meter buffer zone. That mining permit was then suspended when the mining company broke that they went through the buffer zone. And then in the 2000s, further systematic work has substantiated the significance of the site. That's Kathy Kuman's work, and George Leader and others, Kalita Shadrach, and many other of our colleagues have worked there. And it's become quite a well-published site in many ways. This is a sketch map that I made for the subsequent court case, and just to show the areas. So the red area is the declared heritage site, and the yellow B areas were where mining was allowed in the late 90s with a 10-meter buffer zone. They weren't allowed to encroach to within less than 10 meters of the site. And I'll come back to this map to explain the other bits that are marked there. So subsequent to that, from about 2010, I think it was, George Leader, might have been a bit before that, had excavations and put in a very deep trench, which you can see there through the Acheulean sequence. I think it's about 11 meters, and was able to document change through time, and also to get some dates, 1.7 million at the base. But subsequently, other material has been found. The Sol Plaatje University students, along with some students from Toronto, and working with Michael Chazen, have been looking at a very recent site that we found one day when we discovered some sand was being illegally removed from the top of the sequence, and there was Trana pottery, and so that's been looked at by those particular students. There is Middle Stone Age. There's also Forest Smith, which Kalita Shadrach has been looking at, and then of course the history of colonial encroachment and the early diamond diggings. So it's really a site that encapsulates the entire history of the country in its local expression. And then in 2014, we discovered that DMR, Department of Mineral Resources, as it was then called, had issued a license for mining within the declared site. So we contacted SARA, and they immediately imposed a cease works order, and nothing much happened. And it was confirmed that there was no heritage permit, and the site was formally declared. We mapped it, checked verified the boundaries and all of that. And then in March 2016, this company, which had been issued with the license, commenced diggings, declared. And that's the image. I most of it arranged for morning to have the cameras rolling, and not actually with E, as you can see in the middle of the site. Which is on the it was made on ginormous. So all the fish um, we don't know the gravel which has damaged and on the but hasn't because there are ongoing community consultations. At one of our public meetings, archaeology was perceived as an obstacle to economic freedom. But in fact, there's no evidence that mining at Kantinkopje is actually going to improve anybody's life, really. And it will result in the destruction of this important site. I've been making the point that archaeology is also about the present, to ask questions about what are the material realities of Berkeley West today, what benefits in fact do derive from mining. And the image at the bottom there is of local community. They gather up these roundish stones as byproducts of the mining operations. All the mining benefits probably flow out of the province, and the locals scrounge these small stones, which they then bag and sell on the side of the road. They get sold for something like 20 rands, and are shipped up to Johannesburg and elsewhere to be sold for decorating gardens, probably at 120 rands, and so on. So very depressed local economy. There's not much evidence that alluvial diamond mining is transforming the conditions in Berkeley West, and these are realities that we need to talk about alongside the issues of the destruction of heritage. And so, long story short, we also had a review application that ran alongside the interdict in case the interdict failed. And that was heard in the Pretoria High Court in 2019 with a ruling in our favor. And this was appealed and then dismissed. The appeal was dismissed before the end of 2019, but the dismissal was in turn appealed, and this was heard by a full bench of the Pretoria High Court on the 17th of March this year. The judgment was reserved, but handed down yesterday, the 17th of July, in which the further appeal was dismissed. And hence the initial successful judgment stands. The issued mining license and the withdrawal of the ceaseworks order have been set aside, and for now, mining may not take place at Kantinkopje. So that's the breaking news about Kantinkopje. And with that, I say thank you.
Hi. All right, David, thank you so much. I'm coming back in. Sorry, my light. I'm going to just adjust that a little bit there. Yes, that was a really amazing talk. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of issues. Yeah, hopefully we can try and unpack some of those with the Q&A now. So I just want to reach out to the audience first of all, and just again say thank you very much to David. There's a lot to chew on there, so hopefully we've got I think about 30 people online this evening. So hopefully we've got some good questions. So I think Jean was just saying that the feed, yes, I do. The feed was just going down a little bit, but I hope most of you caught it. I see it picked up again, and I think it was okay in the end. And then Vivian, are you still online? And Jean, do you guys have any questions perhaps for us? Yeah, I think everyone is always listening intently with and not sending their questions during the talk. So hopefully we'll get some coming through the chat. But I'll kick off a couple of questions in the meantime. So part of I think part of some of the thoughts I was having when you were talking about Katu and so on was the Stellenbosch. They called it the Cape Winelands Heritage Inventory Survey, and it was quite successful at galvanizing or activating people who aren't working for the various heritage authorities. So, in terms of SARA or Heritage Western Cape, they don't have, heritage officials which have a decision-making role at the Stellenbosch municipality. And despite that, the survey that was done was directed at the municipal planning officials. They asked for it, and a team of various specialists were put together and outlined sensitive places, sites, landscapes, and so on. And I wonder whether ArcSoc itself could be a useful activator to assist the Northern Cape and you at the McGregor Museum in activating and helping some of these municipalities to integrate these sites into their spatial planning systems, so that the permitting process and the kind of integration of what goes on with those sites, especially Katu, it's such an interesting municipal issue there. Those are right around town now, a growing town. And I wonder whether as ArcSoc itself, we could perhaps identify who those officials are in planning. They don't have to be, archaeologists or architects or anything like that. It's people who have access to the GIS system that they run for the municipality, because there are already a number of other factors that they take into account, water issues, birds, and environmental issues. It sounds like we may be able to get a little bit further there directly with the relevant municipal officials than perhaps by waiting for the provincial authority to have capacity with staff as archaeologists and that kind of thing. It might be productive to go there, and then also maybe to have a Katu day as ArcSoc, and to go out there and have various activities that really showcase the sites and things that could be done tangibly that that would not only protect those sites but also promote them. And I think there has been precedent in the Stellenbosch municipality for that, where it's not just about the heritage authorities, because I find they are already at capacity, depending on who we're talking about, and it's quite difficult to sort of see in the short term whether anything is really going to change from their side, and rather than kind of expecting something that would require additional capacity from them to maybe take matters into our own hands and kind of see if we could do something, and maybe work with people who are actually there on the ground, and see if we could work with existing structures around permitting and processes and so on that are already in existence. I don't know. I don't know to what extent you have had engagement with the local municipal officials at Katu.
Yeah, so from I remember our first meeting was 1998, and I think at one period we were meeting almost every year. It's a very fast-moving town, and so we invariably found there was a new official that we were talking to each time. So that was one of the issues. We were making some quite good headway with municipal people, but it just sort of filtered away somehow. We even had one year, we had Wally Soroti joined us, and we had a big contingent of people talking about how important these places are and what local government could be doing. We'd also had the local horses on one occasion. And I think the issue has been just that it's a very fluid population, and trying to get that continuity has been tricky. Michael Chazen is actually there at the moment, and he's told me he's developed a very good relationship with residents in a little village that's alongside Katupan 1. And it sounds as if that could be very fruitful. And I think it is critical to have this local involvement and build up a local responsibility and accountability. And it would be great to see if we could get ARCSOC somehow involved in doing that. I've also met recently with some Khoisan activists in the area, and they're very keen to be involved. So it's a matter of building on this. One of the problems in the Northern Cape is that we're so thinly spread. It's a third of the size of the country, and archaeology is in Kimberley, right at one side, so that's one of the issues that's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have a council meeting coming up in September, I think, and it might be worth tabling the idea of kind of a theme, because I think there are a number of members who would be interested in involving themselves at some level with, sites in threat, or kind of that sites that require a little bit more than just being a tourist, where you pitch up and you get a tour of a site or whatever it is, or just knowing about sites in general, but that sites that there are some difficult issues, and where an advocacy role, I was listening to something on the radio the other day, and it had nothing to do with ARCSOC, but I thought, what a cool idea. It was a heritage dinner, and they had it in Joburg, and they had all these amazing chefs that came out and from South Africa who reinterpreted, home food, like butternut stuff and meats and so on in a, kind of a fancy cuisine, but it was very much to celebrate South African food and reinterpreted. And I thought, gee, that would be great if ARCSOC was, doing something like that. But it just saw the potential for thematic kind of things we could do each year, and I think as long as there are enough members who feel that something that hooks them, that they'd like to participate, we could maybe find out whether this would be something that has energy, because it requires work. I think there's a lot of communications. God knows how much work you've had to do in these court cases and so on, and it's quite exhausting. And so to have extra help, and particularly when it could be even something as simple as being able to meet with someone at SARA in Cape Town, and you based in Kimberley, to be able to just have that freedom to sort of lean on other members that are across the country. It could be all sorts of different things that people can help. And they are complex issues, as you mentioned. So, I think I feel like it worried that it's a huge province, and I think the northern Transkei branch is the smallest one. So I think really for the other branches to maybe help and provide assistance in whatever way they can would be a constructive thing. Let's see if we've got some. Okay, so we have got a question for you. So it's from Vivian, and she's asking, do you need a permit to visit the sites? So that's a good question.
Okay. So part of what we were trying to do with the Katu sites is to provide certainly information, and the most likely spot for that to be would be on the Townland site, which is now within the town. And there's space to do something, and it would be accessible. The Katupan sites are difficult to get to, and the other one, the Bestwood sites, are on private property. as well. So those are issues, and one would like to provide access to these sites. It needs to be managed, and heritage sites, despite all the hype from sport, arts, and culture about cultural and creative industries and job creation and so on, they are expensive and don't automatically lead to job creation. So setting up the management of the sites is difficult. So that was why we were thinking of having a fairly static display space on the Kathu Townland site, where one could show some of the kinds of artifacts that occur there and just heighten awareness about the richness of the sites around. In the fullness of time, it would be great to be able to take people to see the Kathu Pan sites. They are also dangerous. Fencing that was put up around them has disappeared. So I don't know if they're losing cattle, and possibly there's danger of losing children at those sites. So there are challenges of that nature. Canteen Kopi is open. We've got a display, and members who were on the excursion in 2017 would remember that. And it was rejigged in 2016, so it's an up-to-date display. And we've been trying to develop an archaeological route through various parts of the province, mainly in that sort of axis from Kimberley to Kuruman, Vonnevac, Kathu, and so on.
Right. Let's see if we've got any other questions. Oh, it's a very quiet audience this evening. So I have one more question, I think. So there was a mining application that we had to assess recently up the west coast, and the environmental manager drove me around the site near Saldanha Bay, and it's old limestone mining, and it was quite interesting. He was talking about offsets, and I didn't really know much about which part of it. Presumably, I think it's something under NEMA, I would imagine, or perhaps it's under the MPRDA, the Mining Act. But is this something? Because I haven't really heard anyone. It's quite a difficult thing to do on a heritage kind of basis, to say, right, well, if you take out those sites, then your offset is to protect those sites. It's kind of but it is quite an intriguing idea in terms of Kathu Pan. At what point does one say, okay, how much must be preserved in perpetuity, because it's exposed this window, if you like, into something. We could potentially say, if you had to get an excavation out 10 kilometers south of there, you may find more, but that would be very expensive, and from an archaeological point of view, it would be it wouldn't really be a constructive thing. But at what point do you kind of go, all right, this is allowed, but that's not, where there's some kind of kind of balancing, I guess, of economic interest versus, what would be long term the best thing for sites.
Yeah. So fortunately, Kathu Pan has its own built-in protection to some extent, in that with the sinkholes, it's not attractive for building stuff on. The big danger there is encroachment of things around it. So on one side, there's a big industrial development, and on the other side, there's a big urban area which might channel a lot of rainwater down into the Pan area and into the sinkholes, and that could just flush out all the archaeology. So that's we're concerned about redirecting any drainage water away from the sites in that instance. Kathu Townlands is a situation where there has already been this kind of offset with the heritage mall. It was clipped off one end of the site. And Yeah, it's difficult, and we're facing that kind of argument with canteen copy. And the thing about canteen copy, it's quite big, but wherever a hole goes in, it's, as you say, a window, and we're finding different stuff. So the aim there is, and the miners actually said to us back in 2014 that it's all that's left, for mining. And I said precisely, it's all that's left of the heritage.
Yeah,
So we want to try to preserve that,
yeah.
in its entirety.
Yeah, it's an intriguing idea, if that was the offset. So if a firm line was defined, which has already been done, it's been declared, it's got, it's not new work has been done, but if a line in the sand from the heritage authority responsible for it, etc., is that, that is a no-go area, if you like. It's not very big, it's not, we're not talking about an area. I mean, these
Mm,
mining applications are massive,
yeah,
compared to the
yeah.
size of Canteen Copy, for instance.
Mm,
But if some bigger mine needed an offset and was willing to use Canteen Copy as its offset, that could be quite a good deal, because they'd
mm,
essentially get rights to mine, somewhere that's not sensitive. But in their offset application, they say, right, we using Canteen Copy as our protection area. That's what we making sure that, we're putting it under our management responsibility to ensure that that is just permanently set
mm,
aside. That would be a great
yeah,
win. Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So yeah, it sounds like, yeah, there are ways and means, but it's just so difficult getting. No, yeah. Once things go down these,
Yeah.
go down this far, it's people get, yeah, it becomes quite intractable. Yeah,
Mm,
people
mm,
do.
mm,
But I think the winning the court case means that other side, those mining applicants have to go back to the drawing board. And
yeah.
unless they've got some other curveball to throw.
Yes, yes.
Um,
So I see Jean has a question about whether the latest judgment can be appealed again.
mm,
And our attorneys have mentioned that they could, but it might be ill-advised. And I think they've already chalked up quite a cost, um, from 2016 until now. So it'll be interesting to see how desperate they are to mine. There is actually another company that I know is interested in mining there. So
mm.
I think it could be an ongoing saga. But I'm
Is
hoping
is
this is a
canteen
precedent.
is canteen copy within the urban edge of Berkeley West?
Yes, it's part of their property,
Okay,
municipal
so
ground. Yeah.
that's another. These are two. I mean, these are two examples where a municipal kind of structure, is just begging for, clarity from them. It's really strange.
Mm,
I could never ever see this happening in Cape Town.
mm,
Where something like this would happen on top of a declared national heritage site, where the municipality, is really just quiet on this. Why they don't seem to be having a voice in this at all, which is really
mm,
strange.
mm, mm, mm.
Yeah. So that does answer Jean's question. Yes, they can appeal, but that's not recommended. So and then we also had Carol Bishop or Kaufman Bishop, perhaps using Carol Bishop's username, asking to expand on the breaking news and what it means for the future, as well as another question from Paul, who's with Jean, about have any fossils and
Oh,
bones, etc., been found in the Katupan sinkholes excavation? So it's sort of faunal
mm,
material as well as fossils and
mm.
so on. Have those? I would say yes. I'm assuming. So
Yeah.
maybe tackle that one, and then we could maybe move into sort of the. Um, yeah, I think you have kind of touched on what it means, but maybe you can kind of think if there's anything else you'd like to add about canteen copy.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. In terms of the future, the breaking news, it's just a further hurdle that we've managed to get through. The judgment that was ruled in our favour in 2019 has now been twice appealed, and the second time before a full bench of the Pretoria High Court, and they've dismissed the appeal. And so we're hoping that should be the end of it. But it remains to be seen. And then concerning fossils, as I mentioned, there are fossils that are preserved. There is faunal material in the Katupan deposit. It's not sorry. It's not a great quantity, but there certainly is material that's been found there. It's one of the few sites in the interior of that age with fauna alongside hand axes and so on.
Excellent. I think that wraps up all the questions. I think we managed to get all of them. But yeah, thank you to the audience, for everyone. There were about 30 of you this evening, and glad you all made it. The talk is going to be available from this evening onwards. So those of you who have missed it, please check it out or share the link with anyone else who wasn't able to make the live session. And to David, thank you for giving this talk. This has been a great talk. I think I just feel so bad that you have the biggest province, and it's I think if people haven't really driven the Northern Cape, it's huge. It is just huge, and getting around, there are only a few roads that are drivable, and once you leave those main roads, it's just the enormity of the province really hits home, and it is just the most stunning province by far. I am biased that way. I think it is just an incredible province, and as I say, I think you've got me thinking, and hopefully we can think of constructive ways that we as ARCSOC can do something, and even if it's a little thing, but every bit makes a difference. It's to change the culture and get people excited about these amazing sites. If this was France, people would be naming towns after what was being found there. So let's see what we can do. And just hope that you have a great evening and stay warm. Kimberley is definitely a lot colder than Cape Town. We're having really unseasonably warm weather this year. It's really been a very mild winter. A little bit of rain, but it's really dried up, and we had a little bit of rain today. But it's almost spring again. So I think Kimberley is probably not quite as warm. So thank you, and hopefully we can get you some wine or something like that when we see you in person.
Great. Thanks so much indeed.
Thanks to everyone.
Greetings to all, and thanks. Okay.
Night, everyone.
Cheers.